On behalf of Imam Tariq El-Amin, resident Imam of Masjid Al-Taqwa, the Ta'aleem Committee Chair, Dr. Aisha El-Amin, the committee members, Dr. Lionel Allen Jr., myself, Rashida Fitzpatrick, and Dr. Gloria Bashir, I want to welcome you to today's Ta'aleem. Today's presenter is going to be Imam Rabbani, and his topic is African American history, the transition period, transitioning of the Nation of Islam. There will be time at the end for Q&A. Please feel free to use the raise your hand function or submit questions or comments in the chat. Also, Taqwa family, please mute yourself if you are not speaking to help us avoid background noise. Without any further ado, I'm sorry. Before we begin, please note that today's Ta'aleem, as well as past and future Ta'aleems and Khutbahs, are available on Masjid Taqwa's YouTube channel. If you have not already subscribed, please do so. Present Imam Rabbani.
Thank you, Sister Rashid. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Peace, blessings upon everyone. Welcome all of our guests for this Ta'aleem presentation today. We did want to acknowledge a very important part of our history, our African American history. So we have joined us today, Clyde El-Amin, who is also one of the presenters, Bashir Assad, who we hopefully will be able to join us. He's in traffic right now. And Sister Zakia Siddiq, who all had a very close relationship with this portion of history, this chapter in history, that was not just a history for Chicago, but history that national history of national consequences, and is still a very much a national community. And what I was kind of inspired to address this topic, as you will see it unfold, I hope and pray, follow up from a last tour that we had, the Black Muslim tour of properties that were owned by the Nation of Islam here in Chicago. Of course, the Nation of Islam was a national community, but there was a major chapter of here in Chicago. All researchers, all scholars who research it have come here to Chicago because this was where the headquarters, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam, this is where his home was, as well as the headquarters for the whole nation was here in Chicago. So the tour that we took was a tour of the properties that were here. I don't want to take time naming them, but all the businesses that were really supportive of the community, as well as the bank, trucking, the newspaper publication all came out of Chicago. And we looked at all those businesses, clothing stores, et cetera, so forth, so on. And we have to address, I guess we could say, the elephant in the room as to what happened to those businesses, or what chapter, what follows up behind the businesses. Did the community close? Someone born after 1990 may not even be familiar with the Nation of Islam in the 60s and 70s, and even maybe not in the 80s. So it's a major portion of the history. And I would like to begin with a quote from one of the scholars on this subject, Edward E. Curtis IV, who wrote that he said, Wallace Muhammad, the subject of chapter 6 in his book, the name of the book is Islam in Black America, Identity, Liberation, and Difference in African American Islamic Thought. It's a major work, sizable work on this portion of African American history. But he's speaking directly about Wallace Muhammad, the Imam W. Muhammad, who was born Wallace Muhammad. And originally back in those days, he would be identified as the Imam, Supreme Minister Wallace Muhammad, Minister Wallace Muhammad in the earlier period. But he quotes that Wallace Muhammad, the subject of chapter 6, he says he inherited Malcolm's dilemma after rising to the leadership of the Nation of Islam in 1975. So I think we're focusing on this beginning of this history from 1975 forward. So following the passing of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the beginning of this whole new chapter this whole new structure, whole new direction, really, which is where we are today, actually. We wouldn't be where we are today without this process, without this chain of events. But he says that he inherited Malcolm's dilemma after rising to the leadership of the Nation of Islam in 1975. So during the first few years of his tenure, this son of Elijah Muhammad attempted to synthesize themes from Black consciousness movement with Islam in an effort to provide followers with an identity that was both authentically Muslim and African American. And I think as we study this history and all the events, all the changes, major transformations that took place in our thinking, and that's why I say we have those here who can actually personally identify and share with us this transformation process, that it was religious, it was ideological transformation, theological transformation, sociological transformation. So there's a lot here to be unpacked that I think is really the more important piece of history than the fact that we had a restaurant, the fact that we had schools or banks. But by the way, the school has continued, so the educational pursuits has continued, and the business has continued as well, but just not in a centralized context. So this is why this is such a very important chapter in the history of African Americans. And this particular scholar, Edward Curtis, he's pointing out something that really the public, those who are studying, objectively looking at African American history and this chapter, they will see how Malcolm is probably being, his interest is probably being continued under the leadership of Imam Rabbani Muhammad, of whom they were very, very close friends, close associates. Minister Malcolm was in New York City, Temple No. 7, while Imam Minister Wallace Muhammad was right next door in Philadelphia, Temple No. 12. And there's a lot of history between them two that we can see, well, as Imam comes in office, that interest does continue. And I just want to say a couple more things, and then someone else can continue to maybe elaborate on this focus for the topic, for the subject matter, for the discussion topic. And that is the transformation. How was the Nation of Islam transformed? What was the technique or the tactic that Imam Muhammad used? And how was it so successful that the larger majority, I would say even maybe 90% of the people, continued in the new direction? And so that is something that needs to be documented. And I think we need to do that while we have people who are actually witnesses. But one of the first terms in this transformation period was we identified with a new identity that was termed the Bilalian, taken from the name of Bilal ibn Rabah, who was the first muezzin in Islam under the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the prayers and peace be upon him. He was really one of the earliest converts among many African converts, Abyssinia, from the area of Abyssinia, which is today known as Ethiopia. So we can see that the author is really looking at something here that I think is worthy of paying attention to, and that is how the sense of identity, this notion of identity, continued in this transformation. Now, one more quote, and then maybe someone else can maybe want to contribute to this, to the subject matter, which is how the Nation of Islam evolved, or what other forms of transformation occurred. Like I said, theological transformation, sociological, how we developed this new idea, this new school of thought. And this, I would like to quote from Brother Bill. Brother Bill, I thought that this quote from your book on page 86 is very significant. Brother Bill's book is The Muslim American Fight for Social Justice by Bill Chambers. We have them at the masjid and they're for sale there. And Bill, with his generous heart, big heart, is donating the proceeds from the book to the masjid. So when you buy the book, you not only get a good education on his title of Muslim American Life, Social Justice, but also help the masjid. Now, Bill, he's quoting Michael Gomez from his work called Black Crescent. And it says, the quote is, the experience and legacy of African Muslims in America sees the Nation of Islam as a vehicle for introducing and expressing certain Islamic ideas. So, but sees these Islamic movements as having nationalist expressions. This is a quote of Gomez. I think there's a typo here, it's Gomez X. But anyway, he sidesteps whether the Nation of Islam, as Bill is quoting, he sidesteps whether the Nation of Islam is a religion by seeing the teachings of Master Farad and Elijah Muhammad developing in response to conditions at the time. In this way, the Nation of Islam could provide a multi-generational experience through which the transition from non-orthodoxy to orthodoxy was accomplished. Bill, if you could make some comments on that, you could really probably provide us with some context. You just unmute and come right on in, because I think this is kind of a key thought here, a key perspective that really brings us to the Imam W. Muhammad's new direction. And as we practice Islam today, how do we get it? So, Bill, could you make a comment on that quote from your book?
Assalamu alaikum. I'll see if I can do my best. I do think that that's one of the major points that I make in the book, is that just how the Nation of Islam was really a response, just like in every other country, whether you're talking about Northern Africa or the Middle East or whatever, was a response to conditions in the country. And certainly the Nation of Islam was a response to Jim Crow, institutional racism, and that was happening in the United States. And I think that transition, as it went through, if you want to talk about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, or El-Shabazz, and then finally to the experience of Imam W. Muhammad. I'm not a big favor of the word orthodox, but probably a better way to say it was through the transition, and I know you'll be talking about this later, that moving into the leadership of Imam W. Muhammad, it was really moving towards the wider brotherhood of Muslims across the world. That the community now became part of that larger ummah, and wasn't only a distinctive American ummah that I think that I would call like the Nation of Islam. So I think that was a very important part of the transition.
Yes. There's some several sources. If anyone's interested in a list of sources, a bibliography of many sources on this topic, on this subject matter, I have a list if they would like to have that list and do further research. But there's one major source I was discussing with Clyde and Bashir and Assad and Bashir, Roderick Bashir. There's one source that was produced from this community following Imam W. Muhammad's association, called A History of Muslim African Americans. And it was done by a committee of, I think, like over 25 participants in this research committee that produced this book called A History of Muslim African Americans, and by the Islamic History Project Group. In that book, Bill, Imam Muhammad is quoted from 1975, which is really the very first year of the transition moment. And the Imam said, the Nation of Islam will not seek leadership in the East. So the terms like the term orthodoxy may be could be misunderstood. And really what we were replacing was teachings of Farad Muhammad with a concentrated effort on the Quran and the life of the Prophet. Like I think you point out, the points you make in your book, is we're adapting Islam to our reality, which is what religion is. The anthropologists say, and religion plays that role in the life of people. It helps them translate and define their destiny. So I think it's very, very important that we understand that independent thinking that's really birthed from it. One more quote, if I can, Bill, from your book, The Muslim American Fight for Social Justice. The Nation of Islam, quote, the Nation of Islam is not only a Black nationalist movement, but also a religious movement. I think that's a very important point to make. It references to and dialogue with Christianity, have made it relevant to many who were once committed Christians. The Nation of Islam introduced practices meant for Black upliftment that are unmistakably embedded in the religion of Islam, so much so that some former nation members believe that the creator of the Nation of Islam doctrine intended for the movement to eventually lead African Americans to Sunni Islam. Now you give as sources, Bill, Gibson and Kareem. That's your, of course, your references there. But I think that's a very important point, that it was always intended that it was always seen, of course, by Imam Muhammad and those close in his association, in his private personal association, knew that this was to lead somewhere, that this was eventually would lead us. And I think in the Honorable Elijah Muhammad indicated that, matter of fact, it's embedded in the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, as I can attest that when I joined the Nation of Islam, Arabic studies was one of the first, and the Arabic language was one of the first classes in that very first year of me joining the Nation of Islam. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad maintained an Arabic class, as we know it goes back to the time, early days. Sister Zakia maybe can speak to that. So it must have been intended that we would be using Arabic sources at some point in the future. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, but I think that's a very important, that we can see the roots of the transition in the early days in life of the Prophet Muhammad. And
Yeah.
Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Can you go ahead?
Inshallah, I'll comment on some of that. Let's see. It's trying to do a transition from Imam W.D. Muhammad. Actually, to me, it's not a transition. It's a continuation.
Yes.
And it's not, because what we were doing during the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's times, it's the same thing that we're continuing doing now with the educational system and with the building of the businesses, the building of the masajids across the country. And we've done that. We've done we were doing that with the different masjids across the country, and continuing with Imam W.D. Muhammad across the country, and we're still doing it now. And as far as the international world is concerned too, Don Elijah Muhammad was beginning global connections with them, with the Eastern countries, and then we went on further with Imam W.D. Muhammad, and we're doing it, and we're continually doing it now in our own organizations that we're doing now. More believers are going on Hajj. More believers are communicating with the Eastern global world.
Yes.
And so we're doing all of that. We're still trying to build the schools and other industries and business. And so I guess from the beginning in the 30s, from the 30s until now, we're trying to separate, transitions with the Imam, but it's really just continual continuation, because with the transition with the Imam, we did what we had import export. That's what Honorable Elijah Muhammad had as well. We had we were shipping fish and so forth from Peru, and that was back in the 60s and the 70s. And so, and then and what we're doing now, we're doing the same. We're trying to with the I want to say with the with the Imams Association, we're having more young people are being not integrated, but a little bit more integrated with the Eastern um, community, and as well as with the American community as well, with the Christianity and Judaism, because we do a lot of interfaith type things that we're doing with the folklore. That's where the Imam W.D. Muhammad introduced folklore to us.
Yeah.
And we traveled with them. They've educated us. We've educated them, and it's just a growing society. And so when they say integration, but it's more of a continuation.
Yeah, that's a good question. Good point. And I think that that speaks to how Imam Muhammad became his respect as a leader, respect for interfaith. It led to the Imam Muhammad's invitation to the Vatican, I believe. And many members of our community have attended meetings in Italy, at the Vatican with Imam. Yeah. I think the Imam on one occasion was the only Muslim representative from the United States at the Vatican. That's probably listed also as one of the major events in the history of the Muslim African Americans. But if we start back, I don't know if Clyde had anything to add to this portion, but if you all, I would like to go over the Deen.
I don't have anything to add. I think Sister
Got mute.
I know. I don't know why my fingers are not obeying me today. No, I don't have anything substantive, to add. I'll see where your topic is going to go, but so I don't want to force it,
Right. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I'm in a position now that I would can give my portion of the presentation today. And as we were talking about leadership, this portion that I had prepared to give today addresses that. And we're in African American History Month too. And in African American History Month, the emphasis on many of the topics that we see that are presented to the public is about the freedom movement. And my presentation is the history of the African American experience in the freedom movement. This is from a presentation that Imam Rabbani Muhammad gave early in his leadership in 1979. Many of us know that transition began in 75 when his father, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, passed. And some of the highlights of this, and we'll be talking in this address, he talks about many of the things that happened during our period of this freedom movement. Some of the highlights I would want us to focus on too is the Imam says we have had leaders with partial vision. There's balanced vision in this leadership. A lot of you don't understand my leadership yet. Now, I'm going to read from this article. It's 1979. It says, you can have all the resources you need, but if you don't have correct vision, there is no progress. We have had leaders with partial vision, seeing part of the needs, seeing one side of the problem. But now you have the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Dr. King, the civil rights movement, and the movement to dignify the social creature up from slavery have come together. And there's balanced vision in this leadership. The opportunities are here. Nothing is holding us back now but your allegiance. This government that had a face of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a diabolic, drooling beast on one side of his personality and a democratic-minded society on the other, that can bring out either face it wanted for the circumstances that keep us in hell, has purged its blood and accepted to be a human personality with one face for all the citizens of this country. The ugly sins of Jim Crow days have gone from the South. Emmett Till would not be crucified now the way he was. You might find it more pleasant in the South now than in many northern quarters. I've been to the South and I find more hospitality there, more welcome, more genuine human sentiments than I find in many northern cities. We have lived to see Eisenhower, a Republican, bring out the National Guard to threaten, punish his own people at the point of a bayonet, threatening them with death if they stand in the way of our justice. We have seen a great President Kennedy assassinated because of the stand he took for justice in this country. We have seen his brother, the Attorney General, assassinated because of his firm attitude toward justice. They couldn't bargain with those men. They couldn't bribe those men. They couldn't force them to back up. They were men who died for the cause of justice in this country. That meant they died for the cause of our justice also. The courts are on record for standing up for all rights of every citizen equally. This is a new day in America, but a big price was paid. The leaders of the establishment paid with their lives, and our leaders have paid with their lives. Sacrifices, spirit, anguish of mind, and soul all went into the price that was paid in addition to the loss of physical life. Dr. King was assassinated. Malcolm X was assassinated. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was assassinated. Yes, he was assassinated too. It wasn't a gun that killed him. It was infiltrators, the pressure of infiltrators of the Nation of Islam that made him weak in mind and body, that made his willpower weak, so that sickness took over his body and caused his death. The same forces that killed President Kennedy and his brother, the same forces that killed Dr. King, are the same forces that killed the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. They didn't do it with a bullet, no, but they did it all the same. Corrupt elements from a corrupt society and a corrupt government came into the Nation of Islam and virtually imprisoned the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, fed his weaknesses, fed his lust, and deprived him of his good nature, his good tendencies, deprived him of his aspirations of realizing anything at all, and gave vent only to his weaknesses. They came in and destroyed the moral and virtuous achievements of the Nation of Islam. And in time, they destroyed our leadership. They even found their way into the private lives of civil rights leaders and corrupted them the same way they corrupted the leadership of the Nation of Islam. This is bad and good. It's bad that we would have these weaknesses. It's also bad that a society would be so wicked as to exploit our weaknesses. It's good that Allah has revealed to us a weakness and a wickedness that will keep us on guard for the future. Let me quote the words of one of our slave ancestors, a woman by the name of Julia, responding to the cruelty she had witnessed as an African-American slave. She said, "White people look like God in the face, but act like devils in their heart." See how this was hinted before the Honorable Elijah Muhammad spoke it? It was in the ancestral spirit. When the opportunity came, it had to come out. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, "You are a race of white devils." It had to come out because our innocent souls could not understand a human being that cruel unless he had become possessed by the devil himself. A lot of you don't understand my leadership yet. His father taught that the white man was the devil. He says he's not the devil. I say he is the devil. but not all of them. And you're the devil, but not all of you. At one point in our history, we were so much subdued and overwhelmed by the white man's power that we had no room to be devils. So the only devil here was the white devil. With freedom came room for us to be devils. Now we have all kinds of devils here in America. I hope you'll never forget the words that the slave woman, Miss Julia, her word is revelation. I meant that God let this woman's words stay here until today as a sign. A sign of what? A sign that the Caucasian Western world gave us their image as the image of God, gave us a Caucasian image on a cross as an image of God. It made the slaves think Caucasians were in the image of God more than we were because they looked more like the image on the cross. And that woman, speaking out of innocence, said they looked like God in their faces, meaning they looked like Jesus. The image she thought was the face of God, but acts like the devil in their heart. That woman suffering great anguish of mind and spirit, trying to reconcile, trying to understand. How could a people looking like Jesus more than I do be so far from being righteous? I'm telling you, that is prophetic statement. Of all that I say today, I'm trying to point out this. God has been in this struggle all the way. We haven't been deciding. God has been deciding for us all the way. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Alaikum assalam. Awesome. Alhamdulillah.
I think that plays right into the religious transformation that we took. That the Quran replaced the teachings of Farad Muhammad. That was one of the major transformation points. And that's where we began to have new definitions, new perspectives from the Quranic point of view of all human beings, and the beginning of human beings, and the end, and the judgment of human beings. As we acknowledge today, we'll be coming to the month of Ramadan soon. What was the month of Ramadan before the transition, before the transformation? And why?
The month of, well, I'll give my answer. I think it's at least 80% accurate. Month of Ramadan, we did our fasting during the Christmas season, which took our attention away from all of the gravity of Christmas. And Christmas has never been just a positive thing in this country. You know, people do a lot of partying on Christmas too. They don't just give gifts and remember the Christ. It was probably the most challenging time of the year for those of us who had committed ourselves to the Nation of Islam, and at the same time, especially if you were an adult, that's a very, 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 very strong pull on you that goes back to your childhood. It's something that was very probably deeply planted in your heart. That was the centerpiece of Christian worship, you might say. Even though they had commercialized it, it still was the centerpiece. Just as importantly, it was probably the most distracting period of time one could have, who was trying to stay on the path that the Muslims were on, the members of the Nation of Islam were on. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason. That's the reason. That's the part of the explanation that I understand. I'm sure maybe there's some other depth that could be given to that explanation.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Sister Samira. I think one of the reasons was it was the shortest month. And with him introducing that fast to us, it was easy on those who are not used to fasting and abstaining. Yes, the Christianity's holiday and what have you, and abstaining from food. So I think it was one of the reasons.
I agree with you.
It got darker early. You know, we used to eat all times of day and what have you. I think that was one of the reasons, because it was the shortest month of the year. December was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But at the same,
I
But at the
agree with
same
that
time,
too.
some of us were eating one meal a day anyway at that time. We just chose to eat it at another time. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
it was
But
difficult for some and maybe not as difficult for others.
well,
Yeah.
and you know what? It also kind of especially if you were born in Islam during Honorable Elijah Muhammad's time, you were kind of distant from that. You're not really concerned about Christmas. I mean, I don't even know if I even noticed a Christmas tree or anything when I was growing up, but also you kind of distant from your relatives as well. Like, oh well, I'm not going over their house for Christmas, or they're not giving me Christmas gifts and so forth. So
Yeah.
sometime it was kind of everybody's going, okay, not quite understanding a lot of that, especially when you're younger. And or when you became an adult, then you sometimes didn't go to, say, your grandmother's house where you normally would go, you know.
Yeah.
And so, think a lot as we progressed on, don't distance your relatives just because you're not Muslims. Because actually Christians, when they start looking at you and how you have changed, they said, well, whatever you're doing, just keep on doing it, because whatever you're doing is good for yourself. Because I've had grandparents to say, whatever you're doing, just keep on doing it, because whatever you're doing is good for you. And so then we started kind of like going over to in-laws' houses and relatives' houses and everything, start getting back, and killed, because Don Elijah Muhammad said, don't distance yourself from your family. And definitely Imam W.D. Muhammad said, don't distance yourself from your families.
Yeah.
Brother
Yeah.
Rabbani, if I might, one of the points I had wanted to make was, I think a lot of people misunderstand or don't understand, or maybe just haven't thought about it from this angle. And maybe it might not change what you conclude about anything. But I think it's important to not conclude that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was a passive agent in this transfer of leadership.
Right.
It was a very, very important, just brilliant, actually, setup, for lack of a better word, for the transformation. And it was also great timing, because a number of things were happening inside the Nation of Islam. And I'd say in the early 70s, maybe the late 60s and early 70s, in terms of, that was a lot of business success, obviously, but there was also changes in, you might say, the demographics of the Nation of Islam. Many more African-American professionals, college students, etc., had tried every kind of medicine they had out there under Black Power and everything else. And that was bringing them to look more closely, more seriously at the Nation of Islam, even if they didn't come in. They had kind of concluded everybody else is kind of playing. The Nation of Islam, they're for real. And I mean, that was people on all levels, from the man on the street to people in the high stations in academia were saying that clearly the Nation of Islam is the best answer, even if I'm not ready for it, even if I can't see myself stepping into that. I can't come to any other conclusion. And I know that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was very aware of growing interest in the nation from the younger, quote unquote, professionals and up and coming professionals. Like just one sample, we were working closely with Malcolm's brother, who was the minister in Detroit at the time, which served two purposes. It was a blessing for us in two ways. One, they were trying to convince everybody who was a college student to take a course where you had to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. There was nothing said in that autobiography to this effect, but one of the subliminal messages of that was, well, the nation killed Malcolm, so, but we love Malcolm now that he's dead. And so we were working with, the reason I know he was communicating with Honorable Elijah Muhammad, we were working with him. We wanted to bring speakers to the campus. And one of the speakers, we wanted to bring a speaker to talk to the sisters on the campus, because they had they had the idea that the Nation of Islam was chauvinistic. that was the only hang up that they had about the Nation of Islam. So we wanted to bring a sister to speak to the sisters, and we would let them have that meeting. And with Sister Anna Kareem, I don't know if anybody else on the call today remembers Sister Anna Kareem, but she was quite a leader in our
Yes,
community
she was.
back in the day. And he said, well, let me ask the Honorable Elijah Muhammad about it and get his permission. Okay, he got permission, she came. Even when Minister Farrakhan came to the University of Michigan, he told us he had to ask the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He said, I have to ask Minister Farrakhan. You know, that, and we got permission for him to come. And some other speakers were coming. And there was a growing interest in the Nation of Islam as a beacon of a sort. For example, I know I mentioned this to you guys a number of times. They were reading Muhammad Speaks in the African American Studies courses at University of Michigan, because it was the only paper giving you an international perspective that wasn't totally biased against us, meaning African Americans, with reporters who were on the ground in Africa, as well as reporters who were experts on Africa. So it became a source of information for intellectuals as well as everyday people in terms of what was going on in Africa. So I know that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad knew that the demographic, so to speak, of the community was changing. He obviously knew that would call for certain kinds of changes in the leadership and the message, etc. He is the one that put Imam Rabbani Muhammad in front of us consistently for I don't know the exact number of months before he passed. But he was very aware of what was going on in his life. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was not in a coma or anything. He knew exactly what he was doing, and this was who he wanted to put in front of us. And I'll say, for one person like me, when I heard him, it was bringing together all this stuff from the so-called halls of academia to wisdom from my grandmother. I was like, okay, here's all of this stuff. I had no idea when I was responding to this that this was actually the beginning of a transition in leadership, but it was. So it wasn't an accident, you know, and I think this is just truly divine, that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad passed when a bunch of his followers were probably on buses and in cars coming to Chicago for Savior's Day.
Yes. Timely.
No room for a whole lot of lies to spread about what happened.
Yeah.
You know, Clyde, something else that points to what you're saying too, and that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was preparing for this. And Imam Rabbani Muhammad also pointed this out to us. In that last Savior's Day, he said to the community, the nation, that if the white man can respect you, then you respect him. And he also pointed out there was things from scholars from Turkey. He pointed out him because most Turkish people almost look white. I don't know if they consider themselves white, but the man pointed that out too. And many people may not have been aware of it, but there was a Caucasian lady, Dorothy Fardon, who had married a brother in the Nation of Islam. And when Imam questioned her, and this was after he had took leadership, he questioned her and said, how could you join the Nation of Islam? And they were calling white folks the devil. She said, well, I know they wasn't talking about me. I understood what he was saying, about the white man being a devil, but I didn't consider myself a devil. So you can see, even there are people that were understanding the esoteric language there, even in the Nation of Islam.
Right.
Which helped allow us to make that transition.
Clyde, that was my impression as well, that the Nation of Islam stood out, because it's the late 60s when I'm preparing myself to make that commitment.
Yes.
And so many from my neighborhood, actually. We began to see that this is kind of the legitimate response to the problem that we have, the race problem we have, the Nation of Islam. It has real answers. But there's 2 points that really stand out that you reminded me of, Honorable Elijah, by preparing us. He told us, he said, I'm not here. This was a well-known quote of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He said, I'm not here to teach you religion.
Right.
Someone else will do that. And the other thing, I think, as he was, like you said, influencing our subconscious, right? Influence our deeper sense of self. He said, I think it was one of Farah's teachings, wasn't it, Zakia? It says, who is my own self? Was the question.
Right.
And the answer was, my own self is a righteous Muslim.
person.
A righteous Muslim, I think, was the way the word.
Yeah, that's why I remember it.
Yeah. So we were given that vision of the future, of this evolving the future. We got 15 minutes left, 10 minutes left.
10 minutes left.
If we could get some questions, and I really wanted to run through the history of major changes that we probably have forgotten all about. Like the origin of the flag that we point to now, it replaced the previous flag. Like you said, Ramadan replaced Elijah Muhammad, like you say, set it up, right?
Yes.
It's Ramadan in September, but then the point in the future, as we practice Ramadan now, we move into a broader calendar, broader definition of Islam. Renaming of the community from Nation of Islam to the World Community of Islam in the West. The name change was a major point. My name, many other names, people I know, we weren't Robert 53X. What happened to Robert 53X? Sometimes I wonder, are Muslims willing to look psychologically, think back, reflect how we've come through these wombs. And that's why I was hoping people would learn from, a study or research on how the Imam used the term metamorphosis. We talked about the changes of the community, used the metamorphosis. I think he even gave some lectures on it, but he was referring to the Nation of Islam metaphorically as being in the cocoon.
Right.
A cocoon, and then gradually coming out as the form of a caterpillar. And then the prediction that as we grow and evolve, we take on the form of a butterfly and we can fly.
In fact, he had Naeem Akbar write a book.
Yeah, that's
based on that premise.
You just brought back the image, where that was from.
Yeah.
So the name change was a major. Farah's teachings were replaced. The school, University of Islam, became the Claire Muhammad school system, right? That is still evolving and still growing. In New Jersey, we learned of some very, very big success stories in Philadelphia, Atlanta. I think Atlanta's I read was $8 million they had raised, and someone could have said now it's up to 12 million for their masjid, school, Claire Muhammad School, and W.D. Muhammad High School. So there's a lot to still celebrate, to see how the community is still growing and still evolving. Bilalian News became, as we know, eventually became Muslim Journal. And I remember the sister you mentioned, she was the editor, I think, for the paper one time, wasn't she?
Yes.
Anna Kareem.
Yes, right. She sure was.
That was also part of the transition that I'm thinking needs to really do more research on. The man was converting our view of women.
Right, exactly.
Improving evolving our view.
And he brought some people, very, very known scholars, directly to work with him. People forget, I think some of us forget, but she changed her name to Layla Manan. Before she came here, she was Sonia Sanchez. She was a court on the level of popularity of Leroy Jones and Mia Baraka.
Yes.
Her husband was a noted journalist. He came to Chicago. Naeem Akbar was one of the most highly respected people in the whole Black psychology movement that honestly was motivated and stimulated by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. They didn't want to say it, but that was the truth, because our teachings was really looking at African Americans as human beings who had gone through a certain kind of experience. And what that experience had left us with was something that needed to be dealt with on pretty much all levels: spiritual, clinical, scientific, etc. And he brought a whole slew of professionals here to actually manage the community on a more sophisticated level. But it's at the same time that he was decentralizing, because he realized that people needed that room to develop and express themselves and let the best rise to the top.
Yeah.
Brother Rabbani, can I comment?
Yes, please. I won't forget my thought, but go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You have a program. I would respect that.
No, I just wanted to point out what the client was expanding on. The 10th year anniversary. Probably most of us have forgot. Imam Muhammad resigned from the leadership.
Right.
So I say that emphasized more what Clyde is pointing to. The real growth of a community was taking place.
Mm-hmm.
Not under a dictatorship or a central office. We decentralized the community. Imam Muhammad decentralized the community. Go ahead, Rob. Because I was just moving to New World Patriotism Day because I think that's what Bashir was pointing to.
Assalamu alaikum. Just wanted to make 2 or 3 points based on what we've been talking about, and a comment, a point that you made right off the top, Brother Rabbani, regarding the decentralization of the Nation of Islam. Some people have bought into the notion that that decentralization set the community back and have blamed Imam Muhammad for it. Yes. Whereas actually there are people who don't really know the facts. That decentralization actually freed us. It freed us in the sense that some of the points you brought up about the growth of our community around the country is indicative of the fact that that decentralization was very important. Yes. The other thing that comes to mind that in the transition was that the Imam dealt with our psychological self, which had not been dealt with sufficiently in his comments about words make people. Yes. And I take that that notion from the first revelation to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he's instructed to read or recite or proclaim or to study. The Imam said that education is our #1 priority, and obviously Iqra is loaded with with seeds about education. And lastly, I wanted to mention the comment about fasting during December. I know a couple of people commented on that. What comes to mind for me is that that fasting during the month of December was also a way to free us from the commercialism of the Christmas season. And lastly, our concept was to do for self. So if we're freed from the commercialism of a system, then we can use more of those resources for our own development.
Yes. And I want to just point out something like you mentioned about the community growing. It was reported from from our community sources that in June 1983, there were 352 masajid compared to 167 in 1975. So there's documentation data that shows that the community actually began to grow more so than with these changes. That's why I say it definitely was an evolution. The community is still growing and still evolving. There's brothers are making investments in Africa. There's a relationship that has been developed. We have a business association office, National Muslim Business Association office in Ghana, or is it Senegal? I think it's Senegal. That was established. So we are still expanding and still growing. I don't know if we have any questioners, but we welcome anyone who may have a question.
Could you quote that figure again about the masjids that grew from what year to what year? The amount.
June 1983, there were 350.
83.
June 1983. This is on page 165 in the History of Muslim African Americans, published by the Islamic History Project Group. June 1983, there were 352 masajid, mosques, and Islamic centers associated with the American Muslim Mission, compared to 167 mosques in 1975.
Okay, 1975. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Number of schools, I don't know the number for Claire Muhammad schools. We did see one when we were doing the tour. There was a number. Claremont School or University of Islam.
Well, the Imam set standards for the school with the understanding that some of the schools we had in 1975, some of the temples just opened schools to say they had a school.
Right.
What he was interested in was two things. One, developing a model that could be used around the country. And two, making sure that the schools had high standards and that the students were getting the same or better academics than they would be getting if they were in public schools. And we were encouraged to start Saturday schools and tutoring programs like other religious communities do to make sure that their children get a good education without sacrificing the understanding of their religion or their community, even their ethnic community. And now we're seeing the number of schools start to go back up, but the quality is being maintained.
Yes. Yes. And now, Clyde, could you comment on the aspiration for the plan for Teachers College?
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I'm saying this also, a lot of times we think this stuff happened all of a sudden. In 1974, there was a conference of educators across the nation here in Chicago. One of the things we talked about there was the curriculum, etc. We really talked about a teacher's college. When the Imam came in, we really took that to the next level, and actually, he was very passionate about starting a teacher's college, because how are you going to reproduce your school system if you're not producing your own teachers? But it included curriculum in other areas that's really foundational to any society. You know, that was a business curriculum that was a part of it. It was business, it was education, clearly, the social sciences, mathematics, etc. But that was the beginning. Clearly, that was to be the beginning of our higher education system. It wasn't the end of it. It was the beginning of it. And some interesting things happened to that effort. The Imam also had a great interest in preserving institutions of excellence that African Americans had produced. He really wanted us to continue to celebrate African American excellence. So he thought about he looked at Palmer Memorial Institute down in North Carolina, which was a boarding school, because he thought we needed a boarding school too.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
Yeah, that had been run by this lady, Charlotte Hawkins Brown, who was a relative of Nat King Cole's wife, I think. And in fact, Natalie Cole had gone there. He was really trying to save that.
Yeah.
So that concept, it remained alive, you know, for the rest of his life. And some interesting shenanigans got in the way of our college, but I don't want to go into further detail.
Yeah. We're closing now because our time is up. But I want to read this quote from an article that appeared on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I repeat, the front page, because that carries a lot of weight, right? Friday, July 9th, 1999, the Farrakhan, Black Muslims flocked to a moderate cleric of radical pedigree. The son of Elijah Muhammad features a gentle Islam in tune with the times. But the quote in the articles, they give statistics on Imam Muhammad's progress, growth. Hundreds of thousands of African-American Muslims, including boxer great Muhammad Ali, called this self-effacing 65-year-old man their Imam, or spiritual leader. Membership in his organization, the Chicago-based Muslim American Society, has grown to 200,000 people from 80,000 in 1975. They attend 700 mosques affiliated with the group, up from 250 20 years ago. So we don't expect to be a lot of publicity, but when there is, I think it does reflect our community is much more than what it was in 1975. It's really expensive. You all pointed out as it is branched out. So I don't think we got any questions popped up from.
I saw Bill's hand up. I don't know if I guess he took it down.
Oh, I had just a question for for all of you that knew all three men, and I think this ties in with what you've been talking about, is the difference in leadership styles between like the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malik El-Shabazz, and Imam Deen Muhammad.
Bill, I'd like to make a comment on that in relationship to what Rabbani was pointing out.
Was that did he finish the question? I
Yep.
didn't hear the-
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
that was the question.
Question was what now?
The question was that if you could comment on, from your own experiences, the difference in leadership styles between the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Malik al-Shabazz and Imam Muhammad. They seem very different to me.
Yeah. Well, and again, what Rabbani was pointing out when the man,
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. We do have to close down the wonderful conversation that we're having as our time has come up. Inshallah, we will definitely revisit this because it's